In a packed courtroom, where voices blended into murmurs filled with judgment and expectation, Harper Freeman stood at the center of it all. A 17-year-old girl, dressed in a simple hoodie and worn-out sneakers, seemed out of place among the elegant suits and condescending gazes. But what no one knew was that she was not the person they assumed her to be. The spectators watched her with contempt, some with pity, others with ridicule. A black teenager on trial, accused of a serious crime. It wasn't the first time the justice system had labeled someone like her before even listening to their side of the story. But Harper was nothing like the usual defendants, who trembled before a judge. Her posture was steady, her hands didn't shake, and her gaze, far from showing fear, burned with an unsettling calm. Judge Harold Brenner, a broad-shouldered man with a hardened face, looked at her with disdain. "Miss Freeman, do you even know what you're being accused of?" His tone dripped with sarcasm, as if he were addressing someone incapable of understanding the gravity of the situation. But Harper didn't look away. "Yes, Your Honor, I know perfectly well." Her voice echoed through the room with a confidence that caught everyone off guard. The judge narrowed his eyes while the prosecutor smirked with self-assurance. They believed their victory was guaranteed. But neither of them had any idea that they were about to face a mind sharper, more prepared, and more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered in that courtroom. Judge Harold Brenner let out a sigh of impatience, reclining in his large leather chair. He had no time for theatrics. From the moment he saw Harper Freeman enter the courtroom in her simple hoodie, with that inexplicably calm expression, he knew this would be a waste of time. A teenager, for God's sake. What was a 17-year-old girl doing representing herself in court? Had no one explained reality to her? This wasn't a school debate. Beautiful speeches didn't matter here, only the law did. And he was certain that this young girl was not prepared to face it. The prosecutor, a man with hair combed to surgical precision and a perfectly tailored suit, smirked slightly. To him, this hearing was just a formality. A done deal. He strolled across the courtroom with an air of superiority before speaking, not even sparing Harper a direct glance. To him, she didn't exist. "Your Honor, this is simple," he said in an almost bored tone, flipping through his notes without urgency. "We have clear evidence. The defendant was found at the crime scene with physical proof directly linking her to it. There is no room for doubt." Harper didn't react. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Her face remained unreadable, as if she knew something no one else did. But Judge Brenner wasn't impressed. "Are you sure you understand the gravity of this situation, Miss Freeman?" he said, lacing his words with sarcasm, as if speaking to a lost child in a game she didn't understand. There were a few stifled chuckles in the courtroom. The gallery, filled with hardened faces shaped by age and experience, looked at her with contempt and amusement. But Harper remained there, calm, unmoving. The judge let out an incredulous chuckle and muttered under his breath, "That's what I thought." What neither he, nor the prosecutor, nor anyone in that courtroom knew was that Harper Freeman was about to dismantle everything they thought they knew about justice. The prosecutor had barely finished his statement when Harper Freeman, with an unsettling calm, raised her hand. The courtroom, which had been dominated by Judge Brenner's arrogance and the prosecutor's confidence, collectively held its breath. "Objection," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. The prosecutor turned toward her in disbelief, blinking as if he couldn't comprehend that a teenager had the audacity to interrupt him. Judge Brenner, on the other hand, let out an impatient huff. "Miss Freeman, are you aware that you cannot interrupt like that? This is not a high school classroom, this is a courtroom." Harper held her ground, her gaze locked onto the judge's, showing not a trace of fear. "Yes, Your Honor, and that is precisely why I have the right to object. The prosecutor is making assumptions about my intent without sufficient evidence. That is speculation, and it is inadmissible." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor frowned, scrambling for a quick response, but Harper had already thrown him off balance. For the first time in the entire hearing, his confidence showed cracks. Judge Brenner narrowed his eyes, now studying the young girl with more attention than he had given her before. "Are you telling me how to do my job, Miss Freeman?" "No, Your Honor. I am reminding you how it should be done correctly." Harper replied with unwavering composure. The prosecutor, now visibly irritated, attempted to regain control. "Your Honor, this is a waste of time. The defendant was found at the crime scene with physical evidence. There is nothing to debate." Harper took a step forward. "That is what you want everyone to believe," she said without hesitation. "But if we examine the evidence, we will see that the chain of custody for your so-called key evidence is compromised." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Harper pulled out a document and placed it on the judge's bench. "Here is the report proving that the prosecution's evidence was tampered with and does not comply with legal procedures." The room erupted into hushed whispers. The judge furrowed his brow as he flipped through the pages, his discomfort growing with each passing second. The prosecutor, meanwhile, swallowed hard. The judge slammed his gavel against the bench, demanding order. But the damage had already been done. Harper Freeman had just changed the course of the trial. The courtroom was still murmuring after Harper Freeman's shocking revelation. For the first time in the entire trial, the prosecutor appeared shaken. Judge Brenner flipped through the documents the young girl had handed him, his furrowed brow revealing a mixture of irritation and disbelief. But Harper did not stop there. She knew that this was her moment to prove the truth, and she was not about to let it slip away. "Your Honor," she continued firmly, "the prosecution has presented tainted evidence, evidence that cannot be used in court due to a failure in maintaining a proper chain of custody. This is not a technicality, it is the foundation of justice." The judge lifted his gaze from the papers and looked at her intently. There was a shadow of doubt in his expression. "How did you obtain this information?" Harper did not hesitate. Every word that left her lips was clear, precise, and calculated. "By reading, Your Honor. By reviewing every document the prosecution submitted and comparing it against proper legal procedures. The law is not a game of power. It is a system built on rules and due process, and in this case, none of those were followed." The prosecutor slammed his palm on the table. "This is ridiculous. You are just a child who passed the California State Bar exam at 16. Harper interrupted him with the same unshaken composure. "And a child who is proving, right now, that you failed to do your job." Silence fell over the room like a sudden vacuum. Judge Brenner, visibly unsettled, turned to the court clerk. "Verify that. Now." The seconds dragged on, filled only by the rapid tapping of keys on the computer. Finally, the clerk looked up, her face pale. "It's true, Your Honor. Harper Freeman is registered as an attorney in the state of California." The impact was immediate. A collective murmur spread through the courtroom like a rising wave, disbelief evident in every face. Judge Brenner leaned his elbows on the bench and exhaled deeply. "This changes things," he admitted in a low voice. But Harper already knew that. She had entered that courtroom as a defendant. Now, she was the only person who truly understood the law, and she was going to prove it to the very end. Judge Brenner had barely closed his mouth when the clerk's confirmation struck the courtroom like a lightning bolt. Harper Freeman, the 17-year-old girl everyone had underestimated, was a certified attorney in the state of California. The prosecutor, who had been strutting with confidence just moments ago, was now pale. His case, which had seemed as solid as a rock, suddenly had deep cracks. The defense was no longer in the hands of a scared teenager, but of a jurist with precise knowledge of the law. The courtroom filled with murmurs. Journalists in the back rows scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Some jury members leaned slightly forward, as if trying to confirm they had heard correctly. Judge Brenner cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "Miss Freeman," he began, still processing the revelation, "why didn't you mention this earlier?" Harper kept her tone steady. "Because I wanted you to see what really happens in this courtroom, Your Honor. I wanted you to experience what it means to be underestimated, to be judged based on appearance rather than facts. If I had announced my credentials from the start, do you think I would have been treated the same way?" The judge remained silent. He knew the answer was no. The prosecutor tried to speak, but his voice wavered. "This still doesn't change the evidence against you." Harper let out a faint smile. "That's what you want to believe. But now that I know this courtroom is ready to take me seriously, it's time to expose every flaw in your case." The air thickened with anticipation. Harper Freeman was no longer the accused. Now she was the unstoppable force that was about to dismantle the prosecution's case, piece by piece. The silence in the courtroom was almost suffocating. The whispers that had slithered through the benches just minutes earlier had now vanished. No one could take their eyes off Harper Freeman. The teenager who had been dismissed as just another defendant had become the most prepared person in that room. Judge Brainerd, still visibly stunned, exhaled deeply. For the first time in his career, he felt truly challenged by someone he hadn't even considered a threat. The prosecutor, who had previously radiated confidence, now tapped his fingers anxiously against the table, his eyes fixed on the documents before him, desperately searching for a way to strike back. Harper, on the other hand, remained unwavering, her presence now commanding the courtroom with an authority that could no longer be ignored. "Let's examine the facts," she said, her voice calm but unshakably firm. The prosecution's case relies on circumstantial evidence, mishandled proof, and a confession obtained without legal representation. The jurors shifted in their seats. A few exchanged nervous glances. The press, seated in the back rows, scribbled furiously. "That's not true," the prosecutor interrupted, his tone harsher than before. "Isn't it?" Harper held up a new document. "Because right here I have proof that the so-called confession was signed after hours of interrogation without an attorney present. And that, Your Honor, is a direct violation of my constitutional rights." A murmur of shock rippled through the courtroom. The case, which had once seemed like a guaranteed victory for the prosecution, was now on dangerously shaky ground. Judge Brainerd slammed his gavel. "Order in the court. Order." But it was impossible to ignore the reality. Harper wasn't just dismantling the accusations against her. She was exposing the incompetence of those who had tried to condemn her. And at that moment, the entire courtroom realized that this trial would not end the way they had expected. Judge Brainerd slammed his gavel forcefully, but even his command for order in the courtroom couldn't dissipate the weight of what had just transpired. Harper Freeman had not only exposed the flaws in the prosecution's evidence, she had put their entire case in check. The prosecutor, now visibly nervous, pressed his lips together and flipped through his documents with an almost frantic speed. His initial confidence had crumbled. He knew that control of the trial was slipping from his grasp. And worst of all, the person responsible for it was the young woman he had underestimated from the very beginning. Harper stepped forward with steady confidence, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "Your Honor, the case against me is built on assumptions and questionable procedures. We have already demonstrated that the evidence lacks a valid chain of custody. Now, let's talk about the inconsistencies in the witness testimonies." The entire courtroom held its breath. Harper lifted another document, her grip firm, her stance unwavering. This is the statement from one of the prosecution's key witnesses. In their first testimony, they claimed to have seen me at the crime scene at 9:15 p.m. But in this security footage I obtained, you can clearly see that at that exact time I was in a completely different location. The prosecutor leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "That's impossible," he muttered. Harper's lips curled into a cool smile. "Then perhaps you can explain how a witness who swore they saw me at the scene of the crime was actually somewhere else entirely. Because if your witness was wrong, then your entire accusation collapses." The impact was immediate. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The press continued their furious note-taking, capturing every second of the unraveling case. Judge Brainerd exhaled in frustration and turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Hensley, do you have a response to this new evidence?" The prosecutor swallowed hard, but no words came. He had nothing to say. Harper crossed her arms, scanning the room. She had come here simply to defend herself, but now she had achieved something far greater. She wasn't just securing her own freedom. She was exposing, in front of everyone, just how easily the system could be manipulated to destroy the innocent. Now, no one doubted who truly held control in that courtroom. The case that had once seemed like a guaranteed conviction was now in ruins. Judge Brainerd leaned back in his chair, clasped his hands together, and fixed his gaze on Harper Freeman. She was no longer the young woman he had dismissed with disdain at the start of the trial. In a matter of minutes, she had dismantled what once seemed like an airtight case, leaving the prosecution in complete disarray. For the first time during the hearing, his tone shifted. "Miss Freeman," he said, his voice slower, measuring each word carefully, "I must admit, I did not expect this." Prosecutor Hensley shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. He had no more strategies, no more arguments to refute what Harper had just proven. The evidence was compromised, the witnesses unreliable, and most importantly, it was now glaringly obvious that Harper should never have been charged in the first place. Harper met the judge's gaze without flinching. "Your Honor, all I did was reveal what was already in front of us. The only difference is that today, everyone in this courtroom has finally chosen to see it." The judge drummed his fingers against the bench. He was a proud man, but he was not a fool. He knew the public was watching, that the press was capturing every moment, and that at this very second, his own reputation as a judge was on the line. He exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled upon him. "This court has made a mistake," he admitted firmly. "And you, Miss Freeman, have exposed it flawlessly." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. A few jurors nodded subtly, acknowledging that this trial had not unfolded as they had originally expected. The prosecutor made one final attempt. "Your Honor, we can still request a case review." Brenner shot him a piercing glare. "A review? For what? To try and salvage a case that should never have been brought here in the first place." The prosecutor clenched his jaw, but said nothing. The judge turned back to Harper. "I have to ask you something, Miss Freeman. With your talent, with your deep understanding of the law, why did you choose to defend yourself rather than hire an experienced attorney?" Harper lifted her chin slightly, her expression unwavering. "Because I knew that no lawyer would believe in me the way I believe in myself." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. It was the most powerful answer anyone in that room could have heard. The judge nodded slowly before bringing his gavel down with a decisive thud. "The court will proceed with final deliberation. But before we do, I want to make one thing clear. This trial will not be remembered for the charges that were brought forward. It will be remembered for how a young woman proved that knowledge and determination can break down any barrier." Harper did not smile. She did not celebrate. She remained composed, standing firm like someone who already knew the outcome. Because at that moment, everyone in the room understood one thing. She had already won. Judge Brenner's gavel struck the wood with a sharp, final crack. The courtroom stood frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had halted in that moment, with the judge's final words still hanging in the air. Harper Freeman remained standing, her posture firm, her expression calm. There was no triumphant outburst, no exaggerated celebration, just the unwavering certainty that everything she had done, every word she had spoken, every piece of evidence she had presented, had led her exactly to this moment. A low murmur began to ripple through the courtroom. At first, it was just hushed whispers exchanged between spectators. Then, small gasps of realization. Some jurors glanced at each other in disbelief, as if still trying to process what they had just witnessed. The press at the back of the room had already raised their phones, capturing every reaction, every second of this unexpected turn of events. Prosecutor Hensley sank into his seat. His once confident, almost arrogant expression was now a mask of frustration and humiliation. He knew he had lost much more than just a case. His credibility, his prestige, his authority within the prosecution office, all of it crumbled before his eyes. Judge Brenner cleared his throat. His gaze remained fixed on Harper, but gone was the disdain with which he had addressed her at the start of the trial. Now something else lingered in his eyes. Respect. "Miss Freeman," he said, his tone softer than anyone had ever heard from him before, "your performance in this courtroom has been exceptional." Harper nodded slightly. She didn't need more acknowledgement. What she had accomplished spoke for itself. A single clap broke the silence. Just one, sharp and deliberate. No one knew exactly who started it, but within seconds, the entire room joined in. This wasn't just applause. It wasn't the usual automatic response to the end of a trial. It was something else entirely, a recognition of something remarkable. Harper Freeman had not only defended herself successfully, she had not only proven her innocence, she had changed the narrative, confronted the system, and emerged victorious. And the most astonishing part, she had done it with intelligence, with patience, and with an unshakable belief in herself. Some people rose to their feet. Others remained seated, simply watching her with admiration. A journalist rushed out of the room, eager to be the first to report what had just unfolded. Outside, cameras were already waiting, ready to capture the image of the young woman who had defied all expectations and won. Harper turned slowly, gathered her papers with precision, and walked toward the exit without a single glance back. She didn't need to. She knew that what she had achieved would remain etched in the memories of everyone present. As she pushed open the doors and stepped into the daylight, the hum of the crowd outside enveloped her instantly. Reporters, onlookers, people who had heard whispers of what had just happened inside. But Harper simply closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and kept walking forward with the same steady determination she had carried throughout the entire trial. She had won, but more importantly, she had proven to the world that the fight for the truth is always worth it. When Harper Freeman stepped out of the courthouse, she wasn't just leaving behind a closed case, she was leaving behind a precedent that could no longer be ignored. Her story wasn't just about a young woman successfully defending herself. It was living proof that knowledge and courage could shatter even the most impenetrable barriers. In a system designed to silence those who don't fit its mold, Harper had defied the rules and won with the only weapon she had ever needed, her intelligence. She had faced a judge who underestimated her, a prosecutor who dismissed her, and a system that expected her to fail. But she had done more than survive. She had proven that talent, determination, and truth could break any expectation imposed by society. The media was already buzzing with her case. Headlines painted her story as a symbol of resilience and justice. But for Harper, this trial had never been just about her innocence. It was about something bigger. It was a message to everyone who had ever been ignored, underestimated, or treated as less than they were worth. Because her story wasn't just about a victory in court, it was about a deeper fight. The fight to be heard, the fight to be taken seriously, the fight to prove that appearances do not define a person's abilities. So now I ask you, when your moment comes to prove who you truly are, what will you do? If this story inspired you, comment the number 1. If you think we can improve, comment the number 2. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that push boundaries and remind us that knowledge and truth will always have the final word. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next chapter with an even more powerful story.